Guys, today we have the most special guest ever. My daughter is joining us. She's 20. And if you guys know anything about nextTalk, you've been around for a while. Her question as a 9-year-old is what started this whole thing. I was a mess from her question. And I wanted to bring her on the show. She's been on the shows every now and then through the years, but we haven't seen her since she was 18. Now she's 20 and she's getting ready to go to college for the 3rd year. Dang.
I know.
Welcome to the show, honey.
Thank you.
Tell if people haven't followed our journey and know anything about you, tell them just a little bit.
Okay. Well, right now I am a 3rd year psychology student at a Texas university. I mean, about me, I love reading. I love painting. I love coffee. I had a coffee before this. I kind of needed it.
It's so funny because I don't like coffee.
I know. Yeah. I've evolved though. I just started liking coffee. So I made that my entire personality recently. A little bit of my history, something probably every parent who's ever gone to an event knows that when I was 9 years old, I was exposed to something at school. Again, I was 9 and I did not have a phone. That's how she always phrases it at her events. Always that pause. She was 9 and she did not have a phone.
They make fun of me. They will go to an event and they will come home and my family will line up and make fun of the way I say things. So this is what happens.
I did not have a phone, just to be clear. But yeah, that's what started the whole nextTalk journey. So true nextTalk founder right here. nextTalk founder and her mom actually should rename the podcast.
That's so true. Take it out of my title.
Yeah. It's been 11 years now.
Yeah, 11 years. Through the years, we have actually talked about how when you go to an event or you've read my book, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't see that from your perspective.
Right.
Because we had totally two different, like I was looking at it as a mom mad that her kid's innocence had been stolen. But you...
No, I mean, when I was 9 years old, not having a phone, and I was in my room and I just like asked that question. To me, it wasn't like, I didn't see it as a big deal. It was just a question. But when I went back so many years later and read your book and you were talking about like, you heard my meek little voice from my bedroom closet and like you had all these conversations with dad and like your world just completely like flipped. And it was like, to me, again, just a question, but to you, it was like your world shattering, which is just so crazy for me to think about, like the difference in perspectives there. It's been interesting, like going along with your journey, learning all of like where you've come from. And even now I work in childcare a lot. Like that's one of my main things. Like I babysit a lot. I work at my church in childcare. So it's been crazy to see, even just from my perspective and like the education you've given me through your book and your ministry of like truly like how things have changed for kids today. It's crazy.
Even
I see
as
it
a
all
20,
the time.
well, even with brother who's 17 years old, sometimes he'll use words and you don't know what they are.
I don't. I don't even want to say them because they'll probably be like outdated by the time this podcast comes out and I'll sound dumb.
Well, and I'll always say, if you don't know what they are, I'm like, you know how I feel. Yeah. You get outdated really fast in today's world. One of the things that I share a lot at events and in the books is that, you know, when I realized that the solution to keeping you safe was really not giving you a phone or not being crazy helicoptery with the phone, you know, not crazy sheltering. It was really like the culture of conversation, like just talking, you know, that Deuteronomy 6, 6, and 7. And I didn't know the first step to make that happen. Like, how do I just get her to talk to me and we have this healthy dialogue? And so my first step was, and I really felt the prompting of God to ask you this question was, how can I be a better mom? Do you remember that night that I crawled in bed with you and asked you that question? And it was kind of my attempt at, man, what am I doing wrong here? Tell me about that. Like what you thought.
Well, I remember,
you got a little sassy and you were like,
I remember saying, you're not a good listener. And again, to me, that was just like, I don't know. She's always on her phone. Like she's not a good listener. Like I even notice it too. If a kid's, you know, talking, you're tempted to just be like, right. Yeah. And I noticed you
Now
doing
that
that a
you're
lot. Yeah,
babysitting,
now that I babysit more. So there just wasn't a lot of active listening in my like child head. But again, that like wasn't a big deal for me. I was just answering a question. And then reading your book, it was like your heart broke and like shattered and like your earth was like everything's coming to an end.
Well, I didn't cry in front of you, but I cried with Dad that night because I just kept thinking, like, I really am missing it. You know, I'm on my phone all the time. I'm not paying attention to her. I've got to get this right. Like, I got one shot at being mom. And it really was a wake up call for me. Do you remember? Because then I said, can you help me be
Progress
accountable?
reports.
You would do report cards for me.
I would do report cards, yes. She got better. She did.
I've worked really hard and I've tried, but I think we all have stuff. We all have stuff. Okay, so it's kind of funny as we talk about this and you remember it just so differently than I do. As we were talking about this show, I kind of went to her and said, what do you think we need to talk about? And we came up with 3 topics that we think are really, really important that we're going to cover today. One is how to respond when your kid is questioning their faith, what she thinks about parenting phones and social media, and then also the third one is how she hated my teachable moments as a teenager. Now, I laugh when I say this because literally 2 days ago, I was at an event and a mom stood up at the event and asked this question. She said, I've been following you guys since the beginning, since 9-year-old asked a question. And she said, since we were back in our radio days, Kim and I will remember that before, we were on the AM radio station. And she said, my kids now, they're nextTalk kids. They tell me, but now they're starting to roll my eyes at the teachable moments. And when she said it, we had just talked about this show and I was like, stay tuned because my daughter wants to address this because I think I got it wrong.
If you've been following nextTalk for a while, you've heard teachable moments, or I think that's the terminology you use. So stick around. Stick around.
That's going to be at the end. Okay, so this first section, I want to talk about, and I really want you to speak into parents here because, and maybe if you feel comfortable opening up about your journey, about a kid who is questioning their faith or pulling away. You've got a teenager and a mom just notices they don't want to go to church, they don't want to be involved, they don't want to talk, they don't want to read scripture. Help us with this.
Well, I think I'll start by talking about, or just kind of prefacing with, I struggled with my faith, my kind of like my junior, senior year of high school and then freshman year of college. And I think it's very natural for teenagers to go through that, especially like growing up in a Christian household where it's something they've been hearing all their lives. And I don't think that at all has made my faith any weaker. In fact, I think it's helped me build like a really strong foundation by myself. I think it's really important that kids learn how to build that foundation by themselves rather than someone just giving them that foundation. But I preface with that to just kind of lean in and encourage by saying I was by no means like a perfect kid. I feel like there's this kind of misconception out there that like, oh, Mandy's got this nextTalk thing going on. Like her kids are perfect. They're angels. We're not. My brother and I, my brother especially. No, we're not perfect. We're human and we're kids. But just to speak into that a bit more, I think especially when kids go through big periods of change, like going to college, I was lucky enough to go to a Christian college. That's where I go. And I felt like I had Christian community all around me. And yet I was really struggling with like what I believed once I was being exposed to all these different points of view and beliefs, even in Christianity, like all these different denominations and ideas and doctrines. So I think it's perfectly normal. I also think it's really easy from what I hear for parents to, especially Christian parents, to freak out if a kid starts to lose their faith. Because again, I'm not a parent, but from what I hear, that's kind of like worst case scenario. Like my kid can do whatever, but if they lose their faith, like that's the worst thing that could happen because that's messing with their eternity, not just their life here. So I understand that's a very scary place to be. But just to speak into that, I think it's super important in those times that you as a parent have faith that Jesus isn't going to give up on your kid. You know, he's always going to be pursuing them and going after them. And he's always going to be there behind them, no matter where they go. If they're going down like a bad path, he's always going to be there walking right beside them. So even though it's scary as a parent to, I guess, like give up that control, it's important that you see that you are not giving up on them by allowing them to figure out their faith on their own. For sure.
Yeah, I'm kind of having a moment.
Just having a moment.
Well, you said parents tend to freak out, and I don't think I freaked out with you. I tried not to, but I think internally I was freaking out junior and senior year. And I remember just praying over and over, Lord, speak so strongly to her that she knows it's you, right? And I didn't, like, I trusted God with you, but what I was struggling with was, how did I screw her up? Like, what have I done? Like, what have I messed up in our to make her question or go through this or go struggle a bit? And so it's definitely a full circle moment to have you here, because, you know, that's something I've never shared with anybody, because it's your story. It's not my story. And to have you share it openly, I do think it really helps parents, because I do think they look in and they think, oh, Mandy's kids just have it all figured out. And we struggle, like we've struggled. And I think it's a really important thing.
Well, and I want to speak into that a bit too, because you didn't mess anything up. That's the thing. You could be the most perfect Jesus exemplifying parent, and your kid might still struggle with their faith. And that's okay, because you don't want them to have a faith where they are just like accepting everything that you're giving them. Like, you want them to have their own faith and their own relationship with Jesus, like not yours.
Almost like we don't want to raise robotic kids that just say, okay, mom believes this, so I believe this.
Right.
Like, it is in that true wrestling between you and Jesus that the foundation is going to be there for when you get tested or when bad things come your way in your life that I can't protect you from. And I think it's actually a good thing. You know, we did do a Questioning Your Faith show a couple years ago, and I actually think it's a good thing that if your kid is questioning, because it's almost like God is so important that I'm going to put attention to it. Do I believe this? What do I believe? And if they are just writing off saying, screw it, whatever, I'm out of here, that's a little different.
Yeah.
And so if they're struggling, if they're asking questions, if they're like, Mom, I don't like that God says this, that's good. Like, don't freak out. I feel like that's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Let them wrestle. Let them figure it out.
Let them wrestle. When you were going through that, there was a time you didn't want to go to church with us. And I remember we would be in church and I would just miss you. Like, I would miss, and I'd be praying for you. And really only Miss Kim and Dad knew, pray for this kid. I'm worried about this kid. And one Sunday we were singing a song, and I can't remember the song now, but the lyrics of it is, even when you don't see him, he's working. And I remember God speaking to me in that moment of, I know you don't see it.
Waymaker. That's it. Yeah, it was just playing in my head. Waymaker.
I remember we left church. I was crying, and you know me, I don't cry during worship. Like, we're not emotional worshipers in our family, right?
That's a whole other podcast.
That's a whole other podcast. But I was crying that day, and I left, and Dad said, what is wrong? What is wrong with you? And I said, God's working even if we don't see it or feel it. He is working in her life. And I don't know if you remember this, but a couple years later, you started going back to church, but you didn't want to go with us. So you would go to the early service and we would go to the late service. And you called me, or you texted me after the first service. And I said, how was it? And you said, it was really good today. They sang this song called Waymaker. And I showed Dad the text, and it was like full circle, just like God wink, like, I've got her. And I think I think parents need to hear that. Like, God is working even when you don't see it.
Again, that have faith. God is not giving up on your kid. He will not, ever, ever. he will never give up on you, and he'll never give up on your kid.
True.
Preach.
It's a preach. You also said something when we were talking about this, about it's not all about going to church either.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought you had a really good point about that as we were talking through this point. Tell me what you think about that.
I think it's important for parents who really want to prioritize their kids, like growing in their faith. Like, yes, go to church, go to Bible studies, read your Bible with your kids, like listen to worship music, get them involved. That's great. Like, it's all great things. But I was involved in all those things. Mm-hmm. And I still questioned and had a moment of kind of needing to, I wouldn't say step away, but almost like deconstruct and build my own relationship with Christ. So I think it's very important through all of this that your priority is being Jesus for your kid. Because if your kid is, going to church and doing the things, and, you're having Bible study in the morning, but then you're going out to eat and you're cursing at your waiter, or you're gossiping with, I don't know, PTA moms, I don't know, like doing these things that are very much not the character of Christ, your kids put it together and it's very evident, and they begin to associate Christianity with these hateful, judgmental things.
Hypocrites.
Yeah, these very
Pharisees.
They see Christianity as hypocritical and hateful and judgmental. And you don't want that. You want to be showing the love of Christ to everyone, always, not just for Christ, but so your kids see that example and they associate Christianity with love and comfort and peace and grace and mercy, and that's in all your interactions, not just with your kids and how you interact with them, but your spouse and strangers and friends and neighbors and even people you don't like. That's really important that your kids are seeing how you're interacting with everyone.
I think that's so important. And that is where too, we teach, one of our core principles is look in the mirror, because mm-hmm. you want to be Jesus to your kids, but you're not going to be perfect. And I do think I shifted when I realized that I wasn't a good listener. I really shifted to that vulnerability, humility. Like I'm not always getting it right, or I may not always tell you right what the Bible says, or I may sound judgmental, and I don't mean to be, but I think it's very important that parents are humble, look in the mirror, apologetic, because we are going to mess up, but we need to own that when we do. Yeah. So we're not the hypocritical, holier than thou and acting like we've got it all together, because mm-hmm. we don't. We're all kind of struggling. Okay. Anything else that you want to say about the faith perspective? I do want to mention, she said deconstruct. And I think as a mom, we freak out when we hear that word. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about over the years, she would say a word like that and it would cause me to spiral. What I have learned is to say to her, tell me how you're defining that.
Yeah. What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So what does that mean to you? I used to not always do that. And so the first time she used the word deconstruct with me, I was like,
I remember. I remember that. It was.
So tell me how you're defining it.
Well, I defined deconstruct, especially during my freshman year of college, as I was like hearing all these things and I wasn't sure what I believed. So it was kind of like going back to square one and just looking through and like learning about the character and identity of Christ. It wasn't so much like, I'm just going to walk away from the faith and like take a second. Like, it wasn't at all that. I was still in church and like doing all the things, but it was more like, I need to look at my heart and see where my relationship is, and just like maybe like take some pieces off the top, these things that I've learned, and kind of go back to like the source, like go back to the Bible, go back to God, see what he says. And then I can start like building my knowledge and my identity from there.
What was cool during this time frame is she would call us and ask us things, and where did you get that? And why do you feel that way? But also she would email our pastor.
I did do that. I did.
Like 2 pages of notes, right? Oh, yeah. I need help with this. And so again, it's going back to that. She had a community around her. Mm-hmm. She didn't just have me to ask. She had a whole church community that was there for her to answer questions.
And that's why like keeping them, like trying to get them to go to church and like get involved in small group, like even in my time in junior and senior year, like I wouldn't go to church service, but I was super involved in our youth group. Yeah. Even if I wasn't necessarily being fed by the sermons as much, like I had that community around me. So if I was struggling with something, I felt like I could open up to them about it.
Yeah. And I think that's super important. We've said from day one, get your kids plugged into a youth group that they love. That may not be at your church. They may want to go to another youth group. Let them.
Yes.
They need to find their own place, as long as it's a biblical place of learning and it's not going to send them away from the Bible, which we know that exists now. But we, let them choose their community and let them get plugged in. And that really was great. Even I was so excited when the youth pastor said to serve in the ministry, you have to go one time or whatever, because that forced you to go every now and then to church. And then I'm not the bad guy. The youth pastor was. Okay. Anything else on the faith perspective? I think that will be really helpful to parents. Just trust God with your kid.
Yes. Have faith.
Yeah. Okay, phones and social media. Rate me on how I did with this.
I think you did pretty good. Like, the advice you give to parents today is probably, like, I think that's what I'll use with my kids. I think the time you gave me a phone is, like, reasonable. It was, like, middle school, I think, which makes sense. You're, like, going between classes more. You want to contact your friends and, like, have more of an actual social life. I think I probably would have held out on social media a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I think I got Instagram maybe like 6th grade. I probably would have held that out a bit longer.
It was your first one.
Yeah.
I think if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't have given you a phone that early. Not because you did anything wrong. I think the world has shifted. Technology.
Yeah.
Social media, the pressures on social media and the sextortion claims and the way the predators contact you now, they're more savvy.
It's insane.
And so I don't think I would have, in this day, given it to you going into middle school. I would have delayed it a bit more.
It's dangerous, 100%.
But I do like the fact that we did it then, and you're okay. And I think the only reason you're okay is because of the conversation.
Yeah.
Because of that Deuteronomy 6 and 7 verse. I really do. Because we've had issues with social media. So tell me about I know what you're going to say here. The worst social media platform you
TikTok.
can give your kid.
Don't give your kid TikTok. Don't do it.
Why?
So remember how I said I was being led away from the faith around junior, senior year? Guess when I got TikTok? Junior year. Okay, to be fair, junior year was also when COVID hit for me. So I was home all junior year. I saw my friends. I would go in person for theater, but that was it. Those were the only friends I saw, and like youth group on Wednesdays. But other than that, I just rotted in my bed and was on TikTok. Okay, well, that makes you sound like a bad mom. So I didn't really rot.
No, it's fine. You were on screens. Well, I've said it on the show before. During COVID, you were on screens more.
Yeah, and I just felt myself being influenced so heavily. I don't have TikTok anymore. I don't watch it. One, it's so addicting. Like, I will just be scrolling for forever, and then I'm like, what did I even watch? Like, how did I just spend my day? It just makes me sad, and I feel gross after watching for so long. But also because I know how, like, my character, and I know how I'm influenced by things I see online. So I've made that personal decision for myself. With your kids, they're not going to understand that as much if they're like a very easily influenced kid.
So as she was going through that, we did a show called Influenced. It was all the stuff that I was trying to talk to her about while she was being influenced, but she didn't recognize she was being influenced. So if you've got a kid getting into peer pressure and you're scared, go listen to that show. I think it would be really helpful to you.
Go watch it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay, what else? What else about phones and social media? Did you like the progression of not really having a phone in your room? I mean, you had a computer during COVID because we all had to go to our 4 time, but you didn't have a phone at night until later, right before you went to college.
Yeah, honestly, I didn't have a phone in my room at night. Yeah, like until probably the year before I went to college, and even then it was like limited. Like,
so do you?
I think that was great.
Have you heard that conversation of Dad and I behind that? I looked at Dad one night and I said, she's never had her phone all night. She's going to go to a dorm room and be on her phone. She's going to flunk out. Nobody's going to be there to tell her. So immediately we wanted to catch you doing something great and say, hey, because you are such a good kid and you told us this or whatever, you get your phone in your bed at night now. And now I tell parents that early on, I said just no phones in bedrooms ever. Now I say, 6 months before they're getting ready to move out, if they're a trustworthy kid and you've had no problems, they need to earn it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something we've kind of added in the last couple years as I've learned that.
Well, and the thing too is like when they're that young, like again, I can be very easily influenced and I can get like addicted to scrolling really easily. For me, it wasn't like the phone in the bedroom wasn't even like, oh, she's going to do something. It was literally just, I will scroll all night and then I won't wake up in time for school or I won't study for my test, that kind of stuff. So getting that my last year, but also us having conversations about it, I think that's why it's so important to implement those things before they're off. That senior year, we were able to talk about like, so did you feel like maybe you were scrolling a little too much last night?
Okay, I'm gonna ask this. Do you remember the time you overslept and missed a test?
Yeah. Yep. That'll do it.
And I let you fail because I saw you oversleeping and I thought I could wake her up and then she's probably scrolled all night and then she's not going to learn. Or I can let her figure this out.
Right? I figured it out
at
real
17,
quick.
At 17, it's time to figure it out. You got to let them fail. And I remember that night you came home and you looked at me and was telling me about the conversation with your teacher. And I knew she was scrolling all night, but I looked at her and I said, why do you think you overslept? Do you remember that?
Yeah. It was like,
dig deep, sister. Yeah, why do you?
It was like the walk of shame back into the house of like, well, that did not go well.
But I think that was good for you because now when you do that at college, I'm sure it happens occasionally. You remember that.
Well, and it's the same way with like gaming. I see a lot with, usually like teen boys, but they're gaming all the time. And like, if you at home have very strict, like TV goes off at this time to this time, or like you can only play for this amount of time. I've seen it. They go off to college. They don't even go to class. They play video games all day.
Because mom's not there to tell them shut it down.
They don't have like their screen like limits or whatever. So it's really, really important you're having those conversations and helping your kids process, why am I feeling this way? How did this affect me? I think for me that was so important. It was like, how do you see how this is directly affecting that? And like how you're being influenced.
I feel like that's the biggest lesson that you can give your kid on having a healthy balance with screens. Mm-hmm. You need to you guys use the term rot when you're scrolling.
Yeah.
You need to sit in the rot and feel that, right? And feel like, I feel gross. Yeah. Like I've just been consuming for 6 hours and now I'm mad at everybody and I'm angry. And when you see that, then you get to ask yourself, is this the kind of person I want to be?
Right.
Yeah. So to see that how it impacts you. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else on phones and social media that you want to say?
So something I've noticed, especially as like a childcare worker, that I have found very alarming and really sad, honestly, is kind of kids' awareness of themselves compared to when I was in elementary school. I didn't think too much about what I looked like or necessarily like how I was perceived to other people. But now, the kids in elementary school and middle school who are super active on YouTube or TikTok or any of these really influencing social media platforms where they are like interacting with influencers and seeing all these trends, they are super, super like aware of how they are presenting themselves, which is super interesting to me. Like wanting to identify as a certain aesthetic, or it even, boils down to wanting to identify as a certain sexuality, even just like how they're dressing and the awareness and criticalness of their own bodies. I've noticed like just more attention towards what they look like, which is, I feel like not good.
Well, you really didn't get into aesthetics until 7th, 8th grade after you had Instagram a little bit.
Honestly, past that, I didn't get into like aesthetics, like identifying your aesthetics till probably sophomore or junior year.
Yeah. And we would call that just trendy stuff. But that's what they call it today, aesthetics. And you talked about that, sexuality. One conversation that we had that I thought was really important through the years was labels. Mm-hmm. And that really captures everything. It captures sexuality, it captures body image, it captures calling yourself fat, stupid, whatever, these labels that we give ourselves.
Right.
And I think that was a big deal. I mean, I remember when you were older, you talked about this in youth group about the labels.
Yes, I did.
About you've got your whole life to figure out who you are. Don't pick up a label.
Right.
And so I think that's really important if your kids are on social media and talking to them about that. It's a good general way to talk about labels without calling out their label if they're struggling with something.
Right. I just think kids at that age are so, like, their minds are not developed enough to understand that they are so much more complex and their identities are so much more beautiful than just like, I'm preppy or I'm nerdy or I'm whatever,
whatever aesthetic it is. Yeah. All right, this last section, I feel like this is going to hurt a little bit.
Maybe.
I'm going to be humbled again. I get humbled over and over again. Okay, so this section, you said we need to cover your teachable moments.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So, I didn't think too much of them when I was younger. I think it's important. You see your kid doing something or being a little sassy or whatever, and hey, this is why we don't do that. Yeah, that makes sense.
When they're young.
Yeah. As they get older, opportunities arise, maybe with their friends or things they've seen online, to include these teachable moments. When they say something to you, report something to you, Mom, I saw this, or my friends are doing this. And it's super easy because you're so protective to turn that into well, this is why we don't do this. I'm here to present the child side of that. Of like, especially when I was in high school, and even now, honestly. I mean, you don't do them as now anymore. Like, you don't really have the need to as much.
You're 20 now.
Yeah,
I've learned. You're going to be.
Yeah, but especially in high school, when they're at that kind of like rebellious, like, oh, Mom, like, you suck. In that kind of stage, when you're saying these teachable moments, they get hurt and offended, even if they're not going to show it. It's going to come off as sass. So let me give you an example. Let's say I come to my mom, this is like high school, I'm like 16 or whatever, and I'm like, Mom, I went to the bathroom with my friends during fourth period, and they all like pulled out a vape and started vaping. Should we role play it? Mom, this happened. What would you say?
Honey, you know why we don't vape, right? I mean, lungs, we don't know the damage it's doing to you. You could get caught and it could get on your record.
Right. So it makes sense. Like, as a protective parent, you want to jump in.
I just launched into my talking points,
guys. You just want to save me. I understand that now. But as a teenager, it was so frustrating to me because I'm coming to you and telling you something that clearly raised red flags in my head. I wouldn't be telling you if I thought it was not a big deal. So if I genuinely thought vaping wasn't a big deal, I probably wouldn't have mentioned it. But because I was like, I don't think that was like the best decision, I'm confessing it to you. And by you turning around and saying, this is why we don't do it, blah, 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 it makes me feel like, okay, you're just assuming the worst about me. Like, you're just assuming I was going to vape, even though I deliberately just told you because I know it's wrong.
So in hindsight, I wish I could redo this because you know what? I didn't need to do the teachable moment because we'd already had the conversation. And that's why you told me.
Right.
We had already had the conversation about why vaping is bad for them from a health perspective, from a legal perspective, just from an integrity perspective. Mm-hmm. We had that conversation. And because it did create a red flag then, that's why she told me. So I don't need to revisit and spew out all the talking points again.
Right.
And that made you feel belittled, kind of like I didn't trust you.
Yeah, it was a big just kind of trust blow. And I wouldn't come out and say like, Mom, that really hurt. Like, I didn't have the emotional maturity or really the language to say, Mom, that really hurts because it makes me feel like you don't trust me. Mm-hmm. Instead, it came out with, oh, it's not a big deal, Mom. It's not a big deal. Even though I didn't believe that.
And then I'm thinking, oh crap, it's not a big deal. Now she's going to go do it.
It's just like reverse psychology in both directions, honestly, is how it's feeling.
Yeah.
And so I understand now.
Yeah.
I think if I were to give a word to the parents who need to have those teachable moments, I think it's important. Let's say we hadn't talked about vaping before, or even if you did want to just speak into that a bit, if I said, I went to the bathroom with my friends and they vaped, you might respond instead of, well, you know why we don't do that, this, 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 and this. Maybe you respond with well, what do you think about that? Or like, did you feel like you wanted to vape? Asking their actual stance on something. And I know some kids can be misleading. Maybe there's a little trying to feel you out, see how you stand on something. So I understand that perspective too, but I think it's important that you see where your kid stands.
I really like that question that you said, how did that make you feel? How does that make you feel? What do you think about this? That kind of stuff. Putting it back on your kid.
Right.
Again, you're gathering context about what they're trying to tell you about this situation. Because they are bringing it to you because it's almost like they want to talk about it, but they don't want to talk about it. Sometimes I think some kids, and a lot depends on a kid's personality, the relationship with the parent. I mean, this is going to vary, obviously. But in our relationship, I think that was really important. I think also some kids just want to like get it out of their mind. It's almost like a confession.
Yeah.
Like if I say it and then something happens and my friends get caught and I'm with them, mom knows what's going on. Almost like a cover your butt kind of thing.
Right.
Something like that. I think also, tell me about this advice. This is something we say to parents often because we did a show called, I think it was called Emotional Vomit or something like that. But one of the things we said was when your kid is telling you things, literally ask them, do you want me to just listen? Are you venting? Or do you want me to weigh in on this? Do you need help? Do you think that's good if we ask the teenager? Like,
I think it's good
in certain situations.
I think it's smart to just default to listening. Like, we were talking about this kind of one-liner earlier of like, listen to understand, not to respond. And I think that's super important in any kind of conversation, like with a kid, with a spouse, a friend, literally anyone. You should be listening to put yourself in their shoes and understand their circumstances and how they're feeling, rather than trying to come up with something to either combat that or comfort that or
teach that
or teach that. Yeah. I would always, whenever you had those teachable moments, I would always call it lecturing. Like, Mom, stop lecturing me. I know vaping is wrong. Like, you don't have to tell me. We still have those moments sometimes.
Well, and I would feel like I wasn't lecturing, but I think I was. And I didn't mean to be.
Yeah.
I think also like bite-sized pieces, like even in the moment, maybe you do need to cover the basics with your kid about why it's bad, but maybe in the moment it is, wow, okay, how does that make you feel? And then depending on what they say from that, maybe a day or two later, you can come back with, hey, I was thinking about our conversation and, there are health risks and there are this risk but keep it brief. Like that should be like a couple minutes, even if that.
It's important if your kid confesses something to you, something like that, like not necessarily like I did this, that might be a bigger conversation, but my friends did this, or I heard this from someone, or I saw this on YouTube. Less of a, let's sit down and lecture about it, because they're just going to tune you out. If they're saying, Mom, I heard this, and then they hear that deep breath and like, they see the gears turning of like how
the teachable moment.
They see the teachable moment looming over the horizon. They're done.
They're like, oh my gosh, we've covered this.
Yes. And it's just frustrating to them.
I see it. I see that. It's very much so.
That definitely doesn't mean don't teach it, because that's important. That's your role as a parent. Like, you're supposed to be guiding them, but those little nuggets of maybe a reaction or, oh, that doesn't sound very safe. What do you think about that?
Well, we always say to parents, listen, even if your kid confides in something new that's really hard to hear, it's a win that they're telling you, that they're trusting you.
For sure.
And so just reminding yourself in that moment. Well, I think that's good. I think that's really good advice that we need to be careful of, that I have, because we just want to instill in our minds, we have 18 years to cram all this information and then you're off, you're off. And so we're trying to get them all in there, but I do think we need to check ourselves, especially if we've already covered it with you guys and then you're confiding in this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I got it wrong.
It's okay.
Maybe you should start giving me a report card again.
I'm kind of thinking that too.
Well, this should help with your brother the last 2 years in high school. I need to reel in the teachable moments.
Oh yeah.
I already noticed it.
I notice
Do
it
I
while I'm
do?
being
Does he
home.
notice it, or does he look at me when I do it?
We'll like make eye contact. You'll start talking about like, this is why you shouldn't do that. He'll make eye contact with me, and we both just kind of like
the TMs are coming,
like,
teachable moments.
Here, she's gearing up. Take
the
a seat,
next
everyone.
moment. The next talk
Get
moment.
popcorn. We're gonna be here a while. Just kidding. All great
I wasn't
stuff.
that long. But I did want to teach you guys.
I know.
So anything else? This has all been, I hope this is really helpful to parents.
I hope
think
so
it
too.
will be.
Obviously, I'm not a parent. So if at any point I was like, parents, you need to do this. It's just my opinion and what I've learned. So don't bash on me. I know I don't know everything. I have not had kids.
Well, it's just a full circle moment for me, because there have been so many times that I've really wanted to say, my kids did this wrong, or my kids did that, but that's not my story to tell.
She just wanted to expose us. She was craving it. She just needed you guys to know.
Well, they needed to hear from you that we've had rough patches, and we've had moments where we did not get it right at all. We're all still learning. That's a phrase you get tired of hearing.
You have a lot of phrases.
You get tired of hearing that too, right?
Yes.
We're all
default
still learning.
to love. We're all still learning.
Well, dang, I think after today, default to listen is the new logo.
Yeah.
No, let me say that is the new saying. That's the new saying.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. I love you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
You too.
Okay, and maybe you'll come back again if they want you back. I don't know.
Y'all let me know. I could yap forever, so just let me know.
Thanks for being here. I bet people are going to be writing in questions to you. So I may be forwarding some stuff to college, some questions that you'll have to answer on
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. I hope this was helpful.
This podcast is not intended to replace the advice of a trained healthcare or legal professional, or to diagnose, treat, or otherwise render expert advice regarding any type of medical, psychological, or legal problem. Listeners are advised to consult a qualified expert for treatment.